Flanagan, formaður sendinefndar Alþjóðagjaldeyrissjóðsins á Íslandi, segir að skilyrði séu nú til að lækka vexti. Sendinefndin lauk ársfjórðungslegri athugun á framgangi efnahagssáætlunar Íslands og sjóðsins fyrir helgi. Flanagan segir að þróunin sé nokkurn veginn eins og búist var við. Hann telur enga hættu á að ríkissjóður Íslands geti ekki staðið við skuldbindingar sínar og vonast til að botninu verði náð í lok þessa árs og hagvöxtur verði að nýju á árinu 2010.
The main concern of people in Iceland, the general population, is the high rate of interest, 18% at the moment. You said that the IMF thinks that there is scope for a reduction now. How soon could that be?
Well, yes, we see scope for reduction in interest rates on the horizon. We look at things like developments in inflation, developments in the krona, developments in the interest rate differential with the rest of the world. And when you look at all of those indicators, they're signaling there is scope for reduction. Precisely how much and when is a decision to be made by the central bank. And I assume they have I know they have a schedule of policy rate meetings, and I assume in the next policy rate meeting they'll clarify their intentions. I know let me say that I know the people of Iceland are concerned about the high level of interest rates. I would like to say that one also has to understand the structure of the debt in Iceland. There are a lot of people also in Iceland who have foreign exchange linked debt, who have inflation linked debt. So a reduction of interest rates, we have to be careful, very careful, that we don't unintentionally, by reducing interest rates and affecting the value of the krona and inflation, affect all of those people who have this foreign exchange linked and inflation linked debt.
But is there a serious danger of that, given that the strict capital controls that are still in place?
Well, that's a separate issue. I mean, people have foreign exchange loans from the domestic banks, so it doesn't capital controls don't enter into the issue in that way. And of course, they have inflation linked loans from savings banks and from Landsbanki, etc. So the capital controls are sort of a separate issue there.
You mentioned yourself that you were aware that people in Iceland talked that regards to the value of the krona, that Iceland was using both belts and suspenders, capital controls and high rates of interest. Can you foresee that capital controls can be relaxed?
I understand people want to see capital controls relaxed. It's important to go back to the initial rationale for why they were introduced. Initially, they were introduced to protect against a very large overshooting of the krona. Nobody wanted to see a krona at 300 to the euro. That remains a concern. There is a large overhang of non-resident holdings of domestic krona debt.
Ef það fjármagn yrði flutt úr landi félli gengi krónunnar mikið. Flanagan segir að ekki sé ráðlegt að aflétta gjaldeyrishöftum á meðan ringulreiðir ríkja á fjármálamörkuðum heims. Fleiri skilyrði þurfi að uppfylla. Aðstæður verða að vera þannig að erlendir fjármagnseigendur vilji hafa fé sitt áfram í íslenskum krónum. Bankakerfið þurfi að vera komið í lag og í jafnvægi. Nægur gjaldeyrisvarasjóður sé nauðsynlegur því sumir flytji fé sitt úr landi hvernig sem aðstæður verði. Þegar skilyrði séu rétt megi aflétta höftunum í þrepum og í samhengi við vaxtastigið.
And one final comment on this. Of course, global financial markets remain somewhat in turmoil. And I don't think it's advisable in the present circumstances to liberalize controls. When you have panics in international markets, there's no way you can convince people to stay.
No. You mentioned the banking system. When do you foresee that the banking system can function, the financial sector can function normally, be taken off the respirator, so to speak?
Well, there are a number of steps that have to be taken before we can have a fully functioning banking sector.
The Prime Minister said that she foresaw that the banks would be recapitalized within the next few weeks.
I think she was referring to the schedule being sort of late April. Yeah. Late April. But that's one step towards fully functioning banking sector. Yes, we can have the banks recapitalized by late April. That will be a major step, and I think the government is on track to get to that. But beyond that, you end up with a banking sector that has some mismatches on its balance sheet, and those have to be worked off over time. Plus, there's a question of the regulation and supervision of the banking sector. As you know, in the IMF program, there is a measure that the government is going to have an independent consultant conduct a study of the regulatory and supervisory framework. He is expected to report on this very soon, and I think his report could form the basis for an action plan moving forward about how to address the regulatory issues.
Is Iceland more or less on track according to the plan?
Well, yes, more or less on track. Of course, you know, the one thing I want to emphasize here is in a situation like Iceland, where there's a lot of uncertainty, where the global backdrop is uncertain. You are a very open economy, of course, and the international environment affects you tremendously. But in those circumstances, one has to be adaptive and flexible. So the concept of being on track is kind of a moving target. One has to constantly change the track, in essence.
Readjust the target.
Yeah, exactly, readjust targets, and that's why we come here every 3 months, to make sure that we're on top of events, to make sure that the program is adjusting to respond and to get ahead of events.